You're sitting in a survival course right now, or maybe you took one last year. The instructor has credentials, military background, maybe wilderness guide certifications, 20 years of experience. You paid good money. You're taking notes. You trust what they're teaching you because they sound confident and everyone else is nodding along. But let me ask you something. When's the last time your instructor actually had to survive? Not a controlled weekend exercise with a satellite phone in their pocket. Not a camping trip with extraction protocols. I'm talking about genuine, no safety net, this is actually happening survival. Here's what I know with absolute certainty. At least 6 core lessons that get repeated in every survival manual, every bushcraft YouTube channel, every prepper forum are not just incomplete. They're dangerously wrong. And the gap between what you've been taught and what actually works in a real emergency situation could be the difference between making it and not making it. The instructors aren't lying to you on purpose. They're teaching what they were taught. They're repeating doctrine that sounds good in theory, that works in controlled conditions, that passes certification standards. But theory dies the moment reality shows up. Run the numbers with me. 99% of people who take survival training will never face a genuine survival scenario. Of the 1% who do, maybe half remember their training accurately. Of that half, maybe a quarter can actually execute under stress. And of that quarter, some percentage are executing bad information that will get them killed faster than doing nothing. Today I'm going to show you the 6 survival lies that are repeated as gospel truth. I'm going to explain exactly why they're wrong. I'm going to walk you through the physics, the biology, the real-world logistics that your instructor either doesn't know or chose not to mention. And then I'm going to give you the actual correction that might save your life tomorrow. This isn't going to make me popular with the survival instructor community. I don't care. You can keep scrolling and trust the conventional wisdom that's been recycled through decades of training manuals. Or you can spend the next 22 minutes learning what actually works when everything else has failed. Your choice. If you want to be part of the fraction of 1% who survive because they knew what everyone else got wrong, hit subscribe. Drop a comment with the worst survival advice you've ever received. Let's get tactical. Lie number 1. You can survive 3 weeks without food. You've heard this. Everyone's heard this. The rule of 3s. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. It's taught as survival gospel. It's in every manual. Here's what that rule actually means. In ideal conditions, with no physical exertion, with no stress, with no injury, with no pre-existing health issues, with adequate hydration, the average person might survive 3 weeks before starvation technically kills them. Might. That's best case scenario with a lot of qualifiers. Let me paint you a picture of what actually happens. Day 3 without food, your body starts breaking down muscle tissue for energy because you've burned through your glycogen stores. Your cognitive function drops. Decision-making gets fuzzy. Day 7, you're weak. Genuinely weak. Walking a mile feels like running a marathon. Your immune system is compromised. Any minor injury becomes a major problem because your body has no resources to heal. Day 10, you're not thinking straight anymore. You're making errors in judgment that you'd never make well-fed. You're taking risks you shouldn't take. You're missing obvious solutions to problems. Day 14, if you're still alive, you're barely functional. You can't defend yourself. You can't travel effectively. You can't forage or hunt or make intelligent decisions about resource acquisition. Here's the physics your instructor didn't mention. Every calorie you burn in a survival situation has to come from somewhere. If it's not coming from food, it's coming from your body, your muscle mass, your organ tissue, your brain function. And once that degradation starts, it compounds exponentially. The actual truth, you need food immediately, not in 3 weeks, not when you're already weak, right now. A person doing moderate activity in a survival scenario burns 2,500 to 3,000 calories per day. Every day you go without food, you're accumulating a massive caloric deficit that your body pays for with its own tissue. Here's how this works for you. Your primary objective in any survival scenario is not shelter, not water, not fire. It's securing a sustainable food source within the first 72 hours. Everything else supports that mission. Shelter keeps you alive long enough to hunt. Water keeps you functional while you forage. Fire lets you make calories safe and digestible. But food is the strategic priority. Map every potential food source in your area right now. Edible plants, water sources with fish populations, game trails, abandoned agricultural areas, overlooked orchards. Know where the calories are before you need them. Because when you're on day 7 without food, you're not going to be sharp enough to figure it out. Lie number 2. Boiling water for 1 minute makes it safe to drink. This one's pervasive. Every survival course teaches it. Bring water to a rolling boil for 1 minute at sea level, 3 minutes at higher altitudes. Congratulations, you've killed the bacteria and parasites. Drink up. Let me teach you something they don't cover in basic biology. Boiling kills biological contaminants, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, parasites. That's true. 1 minute of rolling boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit will destroy pretty much any living pathogen. What it doesn't do is remove chemical contaminants, heavy metals, industrial pollutants, agricultural runoff, dissolved toxins, petroleum products, pharmaceuticals, microplastics. Here's the scenario nobody prepares you for. The infrastructure has failed. Chemical plants upriver have leaked. Agricultural operations have flooded. Septic systems have backed up into groundwater. Fuel depots have ruptured. That crystal clear stream you're boiling water from might be bacteria-free after 1 minute of boiling, but it's still loaded with contaminants that will damage your kidneys, your liver, your nervous system over time. And here's the kicker that most people never consider. In a prolonged survival situation, chronic low-level poisoning from contaminated water can be just as fatal as acute bacterial infection. It just takes longer. Your body accumulates the damage. Kidney function declines. Liver enzymes go haywire. Neurological symptoms appear. And by the time you realize the water source was the problem, the damage is irreversible. The actual correction. You need multi-stage filtration, not just boiling. Stage 1 removes particulate matter and sediment. Stage 2 uses activated carbon to absorb chemical contaminants and improve taste. Stage 3 is microfiltration for remaining biological threats. Stage 4 is boiling for final pathogen elimination. Here's your tactical advantage. While everyone else is boiling stream water and slowly poisoning themselves, you're running proper filtration that actually removes the contaminants that will kill you in month 3 instead of week 1. Stock commercial filtration systems now. Learn to build improvised sand, charcoal, gravel filters from scratch. Test your local water sources before you need them so you know what you're dealing with. The dark truth your instructor won't tell you. There are water sources in most urban and suburban areas that are so contaminated right now, even before any disaster, that no amount of boiling will make them safe for extended consumption. Know which ones those are. Mark them on your map as unusable. Don't wait until you're desperate and out of options. Lie number 3. Build your fire in a clearing away from trees and brush. Fire safety. Makes perfect sense. You don't want to start a forest fire. You don't want your shelter to catch. You want a nice, safe clearing where you can manage your fire without risk. Every instructor teaches this. Every manual shows diagrams of the perfect clearing with the perfect fire ring. Here's what they're not telling you. In a genuine survival situation, especially in cold weather, especially in hostile conditions, fire visibility is a massive tactical liability. A fire in an open clearing can be seen for miles. The smoke column gives away your position in daylight. The glow is visible for kilometers at night. Pop quiz. What do desperate looters see when they spot your fire from 3 miles away? They see warmth. They see potential food being cooked. They see someone who has resources worth taking. They see a target that announced itself. Now let's talk about the physics of heat retention that your instructor mentioned briefly and then moved on from. An open fire in a clearing loses the majority of its heat to the open air through convection and radiation. You're generating hundreds of thousands of BTUs and warming the entire atmosphere. Meanwhile, you're sitting there cold because the heat isn't being directed toward you or retained in any efficient way. The actual tactical approach. Build your fire in a location that provides both concealment and heat reflection. A natural alcove in rock formations, a cut bank beside a stream, dense overhead canopy that disperses smoke. Position rocks behind the fire to create a reflector wall that directs heat toward your shelter instead of into the void. Here's how this becomes your multiplier. Smoke management. In daylight, use dry hardwood that produces minimal smoke. If you must use green or wet wood, do it under cover where the canopy breaks up the smoke column before it becomes a signal beacon. At night, maintain a small coal bed instead of active flames. Coals produce heat with minimal light signature. Here's your reconnaissance task. Identify concealed fire positions in your area now. Places where natural geography provides both protection from elements and concealment from observation. Practice building heat-efficient fires with proper reflector arrangements. Learn to manage smoke. Because when you need fire and can't risk advertising your location to every threat within 5 miles, you'll know exactly what to do. And here's the limitation I'll acknowledge honestly. Concealed fires produce less overall heat than open fires. That's the trade-off. You're exchanging raw thermal output for tactical security. But in most survival scenarios, staying hidden from human threats is worth more than an extra 5 degrees of warmth. You decide what your priorities are. Lie number 4. The best water sources are running streams and rivers. Fresh, moving water. Looks clean, tastes clean. Less likely to have concentrated contaminants than stagnant ponds. Makes sense, right? Every survival manual shows the friendly mountain stream as the ideal water source. Here's the reality nobody wants to discuss. Running water is a highway for contamination. Everything upstream from you ends up in that stream. Every dead animal, every chemical spill, every septic failure, every industrial discharge. The water looks clear because it's moving fast, not because it's clean. Let me walk you through the hydrology. Streams and rivers have massive watersheds. A river at your location might drain an area of hundreds or thousands of square miles upstream. Everything that goes into the ground, every contaminant, every pathogen, every toxin within that entire watershed has the potential to end up in that water. You have no control over what happened 50 miles upstream yesterday, but it gets exponentially more problematic because of concentration effects during low-flow conditions. In drought or dry season, whatever contaminants exist become more concentrated as water volume decreases. That marginal agricultural runoff becomes a significant chemical load. Those trace heavy metals become measurable toxic doses. Here's what I mean. Running water also presents another threat most instructors never mention: human traffic. Streams and rivers are natural travel corridors. People follow waterways, always have. In a survival scenario, that stream is a highway for refugees, looters, desperate families, anyone trying to navigate through unfamiliar territory. Setting up camp beside running water puts you directly on the most predictable travel route in your area. The actual superior alternative. Isolated springs and seeps that you can verify originate from protected aquifers. Small water sources with limited watersheds that you can personally assess. Rainwater collection systems that bypass ground contamination entirely. Here's your strategic advantage. Springs from deep aquifers are filtered through hundreds of feet of geological strata. The natural filtration removes most pathogens and many chemical contaminants before the water even surfaces. A spring with a small localized watershed means fewer upstream contamination sources to worry about. Rainwater collection bypasses the entire ground contamination problem if you collect from clean surfaces. The water that falls from the sky hasn't been through industrial areas, agricultural zones, or population centers. Your main concerns become particulate matter from the collection surface and biological growth in storage, both manageable with basic filtration and treatment. Map the springs in your area now. Test them. Identify which ones are likely fed by deep aquifers versus surface runoff. Design rain collection systems for your location. Because when everyone else is fighting over access to the same contaminated river, you'll have identified water sources they don't even know exist. Lie number 5. You can navigate by moss growing on the north side of trees. Classic wilderness navigation. No compass? No problem. Just look at the trees. Moss grows on the north side in the northern hemisphere because that side gets less sunlight and stays damper. Follow the moss. Find north. Navigate out. This one kills me because it's taught with such confidence despite being unreliable to the point of uselessness. Here's the actual biology. Moss grows on the side of trees that stays damp. That's it. That's the entire rule. In a dense forest with overhead canopy, moss grows on all sides of trees because the entire environment stays damp. In areas with prevailing wind patterns, moss grows on the leeward side regardless of compass orientation because that side is protected from drying winds. Near water sources, moss grows on the side facing the water because humidity is higher in that direction. In valleys, moss grows more heavily on the side that stays shaded based on the valley orientation, which might be north, might be south, might be east, depends entirely on local geography. Let me give you real numbers. Studies of moss distribution in forests show that moss correlation with cardinal directions is approximately random within a margin of error of 45 degrees. That means trusting moss navigation is literally worse than just guessing. At least if you guess, you're not anchoring your judgment to false confidence. Here's what actually works for primitive navigation. Celestial navigation using the sun, moon, and stars. Topographic awareness using ridgelines, drainages, and geological features. Shadow stick method for finding true north based on the sun's arc across the sky. Polaris identification for northern hemisphere night navigation. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west everywhere on Earth. At solar noon, the sun is due south in the northern hemisphere, due north in the southern hemisphere. Drive a stick vertically into the ground. Mark the tip of its shadow. Wait 15 minutes. Mark the new shadow tip. The line between those 2 points runs west to east. Draw a perpendicular line through the midpoint and you have north-south. At night, find Polaris in the northern hemisphere by following the pointer stars in the Big Dipper. Polaris is always within 1 degree of true north. Learn the Southern Cross in the southern hemisphere using the same principle. These methods work regardless of local vegetation, moisture conditions, or terrain features. Here's your tactical homework. Practice celestial navigation in your area now, while you have GPS to verify your accuracy. Learn to identify the key constellations from your latitude. Practice shadow stick navigation on sunny days. Build the muscle memory so that when you actually need to navigate without instruments, you're not learning from scratch under stress. And here's the honest limitation. Celestial navigation requires clear skies. Heavy overcast for multiple days means you're navigating by terrain features alone. That's why topographic map reading and compass use are still your primary navigation tools. The celestial stuff is backup for when you've lost your instruments, but it's reliable backup, unlike moss. Lie number 6. The most important survival skill is knowing how to build a shelter. Shelter protects you from the elements. Hypothermia kills faster than dehydration. Exposure is the #1 cause of death in survival situations. Learn to build a debris hut, a lean-to, a snow cave. Master shelter construction, and you dramatically increase your survival odds. Every survival course emphasizes shelter. It's in the rule of 3s. You can die from exposure in 3 hours in harsh conditions. Shelter is literally taught as the second priority after air. Before water. Before food. Before fire. Here's what that advice misses completely. The most important survival skill is not shelter construction. It's threat assessment and strategic positioning, knowing where to be and where not to be. Understanding human behavior under crisis conditions. Predicting where desperate people will go and making sure you're not there. Let me paint you the actual survival scenario. Infrastructure collapses. Resources become scarce. Social order breaks down. The vast majority of people who die in the first month don't die from exposure. They don't die from dehydration. They don't die because they couldn't build a shelter. They die from violence. They die from being in population density areas when supplies run out. They die from being on predictable routes when desperate people start taking what they need by force. Run these numbers. In a genuine societal collapse scenario in an urban or suburban area, what percentage of the population can the local environment actually support without supply chains? 1%? 0.5%? The carrying capacity of developed areas without modern logistics is functionally 0. Those people have to go somewhere. And where they go, they bring violence and resource competition. Your shelter building skills mean nothing if you've positioned yourself in a location where you're competing with thousands of desperate people for the same finite resources. Your water purification knowledge is irrelevant if you're at a water source that 100 other people also identified. Your food procurement abilities don't matter if you're in an area where every edible plant and animal has been stripped clean in the first week. Here's what actually determines survival. Strategic withdrawal to low population density areas with sustainable resources before the crisis fully develops. Positioning yourself in locations that desperate people won't think to go or can't easily reach. Understanding that the biggest threat is other people and that your primary survival strategy is avoiding them entirely. the tactical correction. Your most important skill is reconnaissance and planning now, before anything happens. Map the population centers, map the transportation corridors, map the likely refugee routes, then map the areas those patterns bypass, the forgotten corners, the difficult terrain, the places without obvious resources that actually have sustainable resources if you know where to look. Here's your advantage. While everyone else is attending shelter building workshops, you're studying topographic maps and identifying strategic positions. While they're practicing friction fire, you're assessing which locations have sustainable water sources that aren't on any hiking trail. While they're learning to build debris huts, you're figuring out which rural properties have been abandoned and might provide actual structural shelter far from population centers. Does this mean shelter skills are useless? No. You still need to understand basic shelter construction, but it's not your primary survival skill. Your primary skill is being somewhere you don't need to compete with desperate masses for survival resources. Shelter construction is tertiary, after strategic positioning, after threat avoidance. And here's the dark truth I'll tell you straight. In a prolonged survival scenario, eventually you're going to encounter other people, maybe refugees passing through, maybe scavengers looking for supplies, maybe formerly decent people who've become desperate. You're going to have to make decisions about who you help and who you turn away. There's no right answer to that, just trade-offs and consequences. But if you've positioned yourself strategically from the start, at least you're making those decisions from a position of relative strength rather than from desperation. So that's 6 survival lies that get taught as gospel truth. You can't survive 3 weeks without food, just boil water and it's safe. Build your fire in a clearing. Running water is the best source. Navigate by moss. Shelter construction is the most important skill. Every single one of these gets repeated in courses, in manuals, in YouTube videos by people with impressive credentials, and every single one of them has qualifiers, limitations, or outright errors that will get you killed if you believe them without question. The instructors aren't bad people. They're teaching what the system taught them. But the system optimizes for liability protection and standardized curriculum, not for actual survival in genuine emergency conditions. Here's your choice right now. You can trust the conventional wisdom because it's what everyone agrees on, and it feels safe to follow the crowd. Or you can think critically about every piece of survival advice you've received and verify it against physics, biology, real-world logistics, and actual human behavior under crisis conditions. Open a new tab right now and start mapping your area. Population density, water sources, food sources, terrain features, transportation corridors, strategic positions. Don't just think about this. Actually do the reconnaissance. Pull up satellite imagery. Download topographic maps. Drive the backroads in your area and identify locations that most people don't know exist. Verify your local water sources. Test them now. Get water quality reports if they're available. Identify springs. Check aquifer maps. Design rainwater collection systems. Don't wait until you're desperate and drinking from the first stream you find. Practice primitive navigation. Not just once, repeatedly until it's automatic. Shadow stick method, stellar navigation, topographic awareness. The next time GPS satellites go down or your phone battery dies, you'll navigate confidently while everyone else is staring at moss growing randomly on trees. And most importantly, think strategically about positioning. Where will desperate people go? Where won't they go? Where can you access resources without competition? Where can you avoid becoming a target? These questions matter more than any bushcraft skill. 99% of people who watch this will nod along and then do nothing. They'll keep trusting what their instructor told them because questioning authority feels uncomfortable. 1% will actually think about what I've said. And maybe 1/10 of 1% will act on it. Will do the reconnaissance. Will verify the information. Will position themselves strategically. Be part of that 1/10 of 1%. Because when everyone else is executing survival strategies they learned from instructors who never actually survived anything, you'll be executing strategies based on reality. Better odds? Not guarantees. But I'll take better odds over conventional wisdom every single time. Subscribe if you're part of the fraction who question everything. Drop a comment with the survival advice you're most skeptical about now. Let's keep exposing the lies until the only thing left is what actually works. Class dismissed.